Welcome to India Calling.
Thank you.
20 years ago, 20 years ago, our next guest, Nea Ferrier, she stood in India at a Delhi bookshop picking a book of yoga written by Swami Vivekananda. And few months later, she was standing in Kanyakumari. From then on, she has managed to come to India several times. Let's ask Nea what made her come to India in the first time. Nea, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us how your India journey began.
Yeah, I had started practicing yoga in Hong Kong where I was living. I was working in public relations in my mid-20s. I mean, actually backtracking, I realized I had always been interested to go to India, but the thought of it felt a bit overwhelming. So I remember I'd actually traveled quite a bit in Southeast Asia. And India was in the back of my mind, but it wasn't at the forefront until I started a really regular Ashtanga yoga practice. And that turned me on to reading some philosophy books. And then suddenly like something was really lit inside of me, like the desire to go. But I didn't know how to go because I didn't have anyone to go with. And I thought, I mean, how do you even start? So I joined a group. I joined a tour, and it was a lovely group of 12 people, and I chose Rajasthan, and we had 10 days traveling through Rajasthan. And the end of that trip, everyone was like, most of them were Australians. I was living in Hong Kong, and they were saying, oh, this was such a great trip. You know, we're so glad once in a lifetime have come to India. And everyone was feeling so sad about the trip ending. And I knew in my mind then, what I felt like I consciously felt like I was on the beginning. The only way I can describe it was like of a love affair. Like when you actually like meet somebody that you know you're always going to be with. So I didn't feel sad because I knew I'd be returning. And so I actually then went back and actually resigned my corporate job and took all my savings and planned the next trip, which was 6 months in South India, mainly in Mysore, where I was studying Ashtanga yoga, but I also took some time out to travel through Kerala. So that's why I went to Kanyakumari and through Karnataka as well. And the tail end, I flew out of Chennai. And there's an interesting story about that as well.
Landing in India and experiencing India from a yogic lens.
Yeah, and this was kind of a bit more adventurous because I was traveling by myself, but I felt confident too after having already, I don't know how I did, but I just felt fine too. I was very nervous about I was landing at the beginning, it would be going into monsoon. And I felt very nervous about this idea of monsoon. And I was imagining like streets flooded and cows floating down the street. In fact, monsoon in South India is absolutely wonderful because of course you have rain, but then the rain will clear. And what I realized was fantastic was that then I had access to lots of mangoes, which I loved. I never knew there were so many mangoes until I went to Kerala. And my plan originally from the yoga standpoint was to be like on a bit of a shopping trip. I wanted to go to Mysore, but there were some other yoga institutes in the north I was interested to travel to. But I have to say, I really fell in love of being in the South and being in Mysore. And of course, I found my teacher there. And that was the trip when I just really got an understanding of this interest in spirituality is something that has been part of India for thousands of years, and it is intertwined in all fabric of society. And that was fascinating to me. You know, I actually, before traveling in India, I would consider myself, I was a Sinophile. I was very interested in China, and having lived in Hong Kong, and I would travel to China. I was interested in ancient civilizations, and China was disappointing to travel in because that connection to the past and connection to religion and spirituality had really been broken through, unfortunately, the period of communism. And so then when I came to India, where I saw, you know, women still dressed in sari, rituals in temples that were part of an unbroken lineage, like I just found it absolutely incredible to be part of that. And this was 2005, and I will have to say, and you'll probably agree, Sabin, that it has changed a lot in the last 20 years. Like when I traveled there was, firstly, I didn't have a smartphone. They didn't exist. I don't even think I took a camera. I did take a camera. I don't even have any photos from that time because it wasn't that concept. It was like you were just there immersed, and I wasn't in contact with anyone. I wasn't in contact with my family. I wasn't in contact with my friends. I was just there completely immersed in what I was experiencing. To be in contact, you had to go to like a cafe, and like you remember these
PCO.
places you pay to make the phone call.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, a lot's changed in just 20 years.
yeah, yeah. We used to have the small booths, STD, ISD, PCO,
STD,
you know.
that's it. Yeah. So that was a wonder. I feel very blessed to have that experience because I was so engrossed in what I was experiencing, and I could just process that within myself. So I did a lot of writing in my journal, and it was much more, I was able to go on that sort of inner journey of, I guess, self-awareness without feeling like I had to be like communicating it externally, which is what happens a lot now, with the constant, feedback to other people. So it made it a special journey in the sense of experiencing the yoga within, I would say.
Um, wow. Take us back specifically into what really inspired with Swami Vivekananda's teachings or his book, in a span of 6 months that actually made you come back to India, because I'm sure that book played a crucial role to your India journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think Swami Vivekananda plays a very important role in history because he really was at a period of time where you had this bridge. And it was actually quite fascinating because there are a number of these gurus or swamis right around that exact period of time. So I'd say there's a Swami Vivekananda, then also the Swami from the Yoga Institute in Mumbai, even Krishnamacharya, who's like the kind of, godfather, they say, or grandfather of modern yoga. Now, all of these swamis and gurus, they learnt the esoteric practices. They had gurus and they were learning like in remote locations, whether it was in the Himalayas or, and a part of that real traditional parampara. But the difference is they started teaching a lot of the practices they'd learned in English and to a Western audience. So you had this transmission of these ancient teachings that used to be just the preserve. I mean, yoga really used to be secret, right? And many of the teachings of yoga and Tantra. And then you had this shift that, no, you don't have to be an ascetic. You don't have to be an outsider to appreciate these teachings of yoga. In fact, be a householder and you can still do these practices. So Swami Vivekananda had, like many of those teachers at that time, he had a real gift, I think, of explaining a lot of these things. And that particular book he was explaining about the four types of yoga, which of course comes straight from the Bhagavad Gita. But this was a book that was written in English in a very accessible way. And Swami Vivekananda also plays an amazing role in the Indian liberation movement. It was around that time where it was like, come on, rise up, be a strong Indian, fulfill your destiny. So yeah, he's a fascinating character.
I'm glad we connected, because I'm sure we connected because of this mutual connect with Swami Vivekananda as well. Because a lot of my life, first half of my life was spent in Vivekananda Kendra and in the teachings of Swami Vivekananda and Kanyakumari. So yeah, I resonate a lot with what you're saying. Kanyakumari is
I'll just
famous
add
for
that
Swami.
I'll add there was the interest that Swami Vivekananda that then led on to learning about his teacher, Ramakrishna. And the Ramakrishna missions are places that I always love spending time in India. So whenever I go to a city, I'll normally seek out the Ramakrishna mission, particularly because they just have the evening ritual, the evening arti is so beautiful. and the chants. And many of the chants in that evening arati are actually written by Swami Vivekananda, and they're in Bengali. So you'll have Sanskrit as well as Bengali bhajans. And I actually did have the good fortune a few trips later to go to Calcutta and go to the Kali Mandir and then take the boat ride down the river to Belur Math, where is the resting place of Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. So that's one of my India trip highlights for sure.
Wow, wow. And staying with Kanyakumari itself, Kanyakumari is famous for Vivekananda, where he had the realization, and he has also written about it. For you personally, did anything shift here subtly? Any experiences in Kanyakumari that you would like to share?
No, I didn't have any experience there specifically. I do this was 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
So I do have a very strong memory so part of my trip to Kerala was going to the Sivananda yoga ashram. And these yoga ashrams, I also often, when people ask about yoga experiences in India, I often recommend them because for Westerners, they do give you a very nice sort of introduction into Vedanta, into yoga philosophy, as well as asana practice, pranayama in a ashram style environment. And we had a day trip as part of that. So the ashram is in Trivandrum in Neyyar. And Shaban, I actually don't know where we went, but we went to a temple that was so ancient and full of trees inside. The temple had been built around, the roots of maybe large banyan trees. I can't remember it that clearly. It was one of the first times for me to go into an Indian temple. And, I come actually from a Christian background, and it was very curious to me. And I remember feeling so fascinated, but so like there was something very organic and primal and very impactful, that experience. Wow. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. I'd love to know where it was we went, but unfortunately I can't remember. But that gave me
the next time you're here in South, we go find that.
Yes.
How did Ashtanga happen? What drew you to Ashtanga, and what has been your experience of learning Ashtanga and then practicing Ashtanga as well?
So I had always been interested in yoga, had done it on and off as sort of more like a hobby. The practice of Ashtanga really came to me when I decided to take a big break from sort of the partying lifestyle that I'd been leading in Hong Kong. It's a very hedonistic environment. And I had started doing some self-reflection and realizing that probably many of the problems in my life were probably self-inflicted by too much hedonism. So that came along at the time I was taking a sort of a break from those sort of things. And I fell into the way of practicing yoga every day, which of course is really the only way you can experience profound shifts. It can't be just here and there. I would say the Ashtanga yoga is what then took it into like a sadhana. Like it went from being just a hobby like you do when you feel like it to something that you do every morning whether you feel like it or not. And that had a very intense purification of my body, mind, nervous system. And it was like a quantum leap in terms of how I started seeing the world. And essentially I started seeing things with greater clarity. And then the more I sort of studied and looked into the teachings of yoga, I realized that is actually what the yoga practice is meant to be doing for us, is to these techniques, the working with the breath, working with the body, is a way to bring a certain stability to the mind so we can see things clearly and, go transition into some of more of the subtle limbs, such as, meditation. The mind needs to be at a certain stability to even attempt to, go into the more subtle layers of meditation. So I was very lucky because I didn't wait too long before I went to India and found my teacher, and then I was given the blessing to teach the practice in 2010. So what would happen was I would go to Mysore for a couple of months, and I had a traveling partner, and he was very, very interested in Buddhism, and that took us to the north and some other quite amazing places in the Himalayas. I mean, this is the thing with the India travel. You can only experience it to the level that your mind is ready to experience. But then you can look back later and think, gosh, I want to revisit that place now that I know a little bit more. So not only does India there's still so many places I would like to visit, there's a lot of places that I'd love to revisit. So for example, we traveled in the Himalayas to Badrinath, Kedarnath, and we were in Joshimath, which now I look back and go, wow, that's where Shankaracharya was enlightened at the age of 13, but I had no knowledge of this at that time. At that time, it was just a beautiful place to visit. But now, years later, I look back and say, wow, actually, I was very blessed to be taken to these places without me even realizing where I was going to.
There are multiple tangents I can go from here, but I would specifically like to talk about finding your guru and being with your guru, because I know that your guru played a major role, at that time, during your Ashtanga and further into your practice as well. How easy was it to to be part, to accept someone as a guru, because you come from a different culture, and I'm not sure if that was alien to you. And how was the process of, having a guru like, and, what did you learn from it?
So I would say there are different types of gurus and different types of teachers. I would say probably my yoga asana in terms of Ashtanga yoga, I would say he played a very big role in my life in terms of being able to return to India. I would say he was my teacher, but it was different to it was not an initiation. So I would say that I would probably clarify and say it was not a parampara in terms of an initiation took place. So just to be clear on the terminology, so I would probably say teacher would be better, yoga teacher.
Yeah, got it.
And I now do have someone that I considered my guru through the Sri Vidya Tantric lineage. And so now I would see there's a difference because of that initiation process. Yeah. But of course, there are many, teachers that you have that you would also refer very affectionately as my guru, but to be technically accurate. Yeah. Slightly different.
Tell us about that year, Himachal, Hampi, Vedic chanting, and Varanasi. What each of these places.
That was an incredible year. I don't know how I managed to go to all these sacred places in 1 year, but it happened. So I have led retreats in Himachal Pradesh, I think 3 or 4 times now. It's one of my favorite places to visit. Again, when I first went, almost 20 years ago, it's where I did my first Vipassana. So I was very interested in visiting a Dharamshala in that area because of the connection to Buddhism. So I had spent time in Himachal and then also went up to Ladakh. And I was quite interested in Buddhism at that time. That trip, I also went to Bihar and spent a month at Bodh Gaya. Okay. Which was quite incredible. Fast forward, 10 or 15 years, my interest in Tantra and then hence the goddess has strengthened, and Himachal also has a calling because of the strong presence of Durga there and a lot of the Durga temples. So that's why I like returning there. So I had a retreat there, and then that was at the beginning of the year. And then I set some time aside from my own travels, which was to join my Veda chanting teacher. And she organized her retreat in Hampi. And again, it was interesting because I had been to Hampi in 2006, very new to India, not knowing any of the stories connected with that place, not really knowing anything, but still finding it very magical. And I did have a very beautiful experience in a Krishna temple there. Even right back then, Krishna has always been kind of guiding me through these India trips. So that was fantastic to visit back many years later with a little bit more knowledge. And now that I'm reflecting on this, I think this is the appeal of India, that it will give you what you need at that time. So every trip will be different for each person and for what they're, it will meet where you are, but it keeps evolving. Yeah. And then I did another retreat at the end of the year, which was to Varanasi, which was, again, second time to Varanasi, maybe 15 years in between. And I think I can never say which is my favorite place, but while I was there, I was saying, I think this is my favorite place because it's full of, all the gods are there. So
Yeah.
if you
And the
like
intensity of
going to
Varanasi
temples
is
like I
just,
do, then it's wonderful.
yeah, yeah. Talk to us about Devi worship, your journey of understanding Mahavidyas, and specifically around Varanasi. How has Varanasi, helped you, understand and, be in devotion and follow this path?
Yeah, Tantra was something I was always interested in, but didn't really know very much about. And I would read a lot of books, but still not really quite understand. And I'm still learning. But what started to appeal to me, and I think, I had a period of when I first started yoga practice where and this is quite common actually, that you decide to almost renounce the world because you become so interested in this yoga and so interested in sort of moksha that becomes what you're interested in. Now, in retrospect, I look back and think what was missing from that yoga education, and this is a little bit because of historically, because a lot of the like I was mentioning, the transmission from the west to the east to the west was by monastics. But not all of them were monastics. So, for example, like the Krishnamacharya and the guru for the Yoga Institute, they were householders, which means that yoga doesn't have to be just for a renunciant. So the worst thing you can do really is actually still be in this world, not becoming a monastic, yet using your spirituality to, in a sense, bypass proper engagement in the world. And that might be through relationships, responsibility. And, it was actually a shift for me because I got married, I settled down, I moved to Dubai, a very material place. And I realized that I'd been focused just on the, only half of the Purusharthas, that
No.
karma and artha. You can't just have dharma and moksha. So, the four
Yeah,
Purusharthas
yeah.
of a
Mm,
grounded life. And this is some of the problem where it comes from a Westerner trying to adopt some of these concepts, because for you as for Indians, this is part of, you've
mm,
grown up with these concepts.
mm,
Where we as yoga practitioners come and say, oh, my dharma is to be a yoga teacher and my dharma is to achieve moksha. And then,
yeah,
I shouldn't be interested in money. I can't have too much pleasure. I need to renounce the
mm,
world. I need to withdraw, contain my senses. And in fact, karma and artha, pleasure and material means, are a very important part of a human. And
uh,
that was a real awakening for me to realize that, these are acceptable as somebody who's interested in spirituality, that you can actually still be interested in these things and find the spiritual in
mm,
that. And that really then leads into the tantric darshan. Tantra came,
wow.
something was for householders to practice, quite often women as well. It was often secret, but it's something that you don't have to give up the world. In
Mm,
fact, you are going to find your liberation through the body
no,
and
no,
through the engagement of the world. And of course, Devi, being Prakriti, the manifest form, is then what we, for women particularly, because we are so in the world through, raising children or running households, that appeal of connecting with a goddess that is, representing, or she is all of those things. She is what moves through our manifest, that has great appeal.
there are a lot of first timers, who are, who learn yoga, like a yoga TTC program. and they don't go beyond asanas. Have you come across these in the West? What do you suggest for solo travelers? To take up a serious path. Along the lines of practice and sadhana.
Look, I think that everyone is very different and everyone's paths are very different. And as we know, true interest in spirituality, it's not for everyone. It actually doesn't have to be for everyone. It's if somebody is getting benefit from yoga asana, from the breathing techniques, the yoga postures, and it's bringing like health to their life, then that's great. If they get the desire to learn more, then they will. And if they take that step towards that, things will come to support them. But it's okay. It's not. I'm not too. I used to get very bothered by this, thinking, oh, people aren't understanding the full of yoga, but it's fine. Maybe next lifetime.
Yeah.
What I do think it is important, and I am happy to see, in that this is also something that's happened more recently, and I do think it is great that there are so many people talking about the fact that, yoga, we're using this word to describe something that now has been quite reduced to actually just exercise. But it's a complex topic because, like when I mentioned about this transmission from East to West, some of the ways that yoga was presented to the West was through the lens of the health benefits. And so that's how it then did move on to them becoming a fixture and part of the well-being industry. Do you know what I mean?
You have led classes. Yeah. You have led classes in Dubai, South Africa, Australia, most parts of the world. Now, what are the common misconceptions that you come across about yoga that you have to constantly address as a teacher?
I think one is funny is people always ask me about my opinions on Pilates. And I was saying, I don't know anything about Pilates. And people seem confused that I, as a yoga teacher, don't know anything about Pilates. I mean, of course I know, because I've done a couple of classes, but I don't, so now it's become a conflation, like yoga, Pilates, like the same thing. So I find that is, interesting.
Could you clear the air, please, on that? The yoga Pilates differences?
Well, I mean, yeah, Pilates, to be honest, I can't even say what exactly Pilates is, but it's a system for strengthening the body, I understand, where, yoga is psycho-spirit. It's what do I even say? It's a whole system for enlightenment, essentially. That is
Whereas
beyond.
Pilates is just bodily strengthening.
I believe so, but interestingly, I believe when Joseph Pilates taught it, there was actually a more spiritual element to it. Now, this is where we get into a tricky territory, because from a tantric perspective, you can't separate the body and the mind. From yoga physiology perspective, this is the problem that we have in the West. We're always saying the body, mind, and we're always saying, then now people in this situation of saying too much focus on asana. Everyone's just focused on asana, but you can't delineate. You just split body and mind like that. And that's the whole teaching of yoga, that our consciousness permeates our physical organism. It's actually a mind-body complex. So if you're working with the body, you might have an impact on your mind, vice versa. It's not so easy just to say, don't. The people say, oh, that Patanjali only wrote 3 sutras on asana in the whole of the text. But firstly, there's actually only 196 sutras anyway. It's quite a short text. And the section that lays out the 8 limbs is also just part of chapter 2, the sadhana pada. And he gives actually equal weight to each of the limbs. So it's not that asana is not important. So I think we have to be careful there of, sort of implying that there is that seated meditation is the only way. Patanjali specifically also mentions the body. And of course, that's the teachings of Tantra. We use the body and the breath as a gateway to the mind.
Would you like to add some other misconceptions that you commonly come across?
I would say, yoga to me has always been the science of religion. In fact, I think that comes from Swami Vivekananda. So it is a technology that can be applied to different darshans. So I know serious yoga practitioners who are Christian, who are Buddhist, who are Muslim, and they're using yoga practices to help them find a steadiness in the mind to help with whatever religion they're engaged in. My teachers in India, in Mysore, always said that yoga is universal. It really, whatever path you are, it will only help you go deeper into that.
And your path has taken you into temples, Devi worship, and more devotion, in Devi worship. And you said you're a born Christian as well. How has this path been? Have you also noticed, since you lead people into retreats, is there a common religious lens that people find it hard to break? Or how does that happen in your retreats when you bring them to India?
I think when you're coming to India as a Westerner, you're having these experiences through a cultural lens. You're experiencing another culture, and how that affects you or the feeling that you have inside is very dependent on the person. What I've realized is that it's actually you can't even say come on this spiritual retreat, because you don't even need to say that, because it is so part of the experience that you will just have. I mean, I don't even like this distinction between the material, spiritual and the material. Like it doesn't make any sense. Every experience we're having is spiritual, and that's particularly amplified when you're in India, for sure.
Give us tips for an international traveler who has felt this pull for India and is wanting to explore India. What would be your 2 cents for them?
I really, really believe that if India is calling you, then you must go, because it's not for some, it's not a whim, there's a reason for that. And normally if you get that calling, then, and if you have the space in your life to be able to go, then you should go. That's what I think.
Where do I start when I go to India for the first time?
Yeah, so I think
India is
like
huge.
I do recommend often like what I did, and joining a tour or retreat is a very nice way to do it. I still and I think people that I speak to that have had, when I talk to people and they say, oh no, I don't like India, and I find out that the only perception of India is because they had to go to a conference and they went to Mumbai and stayed at a 5-star hotel, and they said they don't like India because they're in traffic from the airport to the hotel. I mean, no, I think it is quite hard to start to travel without having some assistance, especially even just saving time. Now, when I got used to traveling in India and had somebody to travel with, we would do all our train bookings and everything by ourselves. But that took time. I mean, to go down to the train station to book your ticket, you're putting
And in
aside a
queue.
whole day. You're standing in the queue, and then you're realizing that there's different ideas about queue.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
And there's lunch break.
saving time, putting and knowing the ins and outs of an itinerary that works well, and I think it is worthwhile having some help.
Yeah. A lot of women these days, women and men, who are starting out on India are really fascinated about having a guru. And they also get into traps. In India also you can get into traps, right? So what would your advice be for someone who is constantly having this thought of, I want a guru, and landing in India and getting into these traps? What would your advice be?
See, the thing is one of the very confounding things about India is you never really know what's going on. So even if somebody is saying like, come and look at my stuff in a shop, or come to my home and have a chai, like you never knowing, like, am I getting cheated? You don't know. So sometimes you just think, I don't care. I want to go and look in this shop. Maybe I am getting ripped off, but is it such a big deal if I get ripped off? And even after traveling for many years, I think oh, I know how not to let this happen. And you'll still have situations where somebody could be very genuinely trying to help you, but you're too fearful to, take their help. It's very, difficult to know. So the similar thing with these spiritual experiences, like, yeah, maybe you meet some, yoga teacher or guru and, maybe in the end they end up being a sham, but maybe along the way it was an experience that you were meant to have. And I'm not saying, put yourself in harm, but I'm saying that, it's impossible to know. Quite often the people that are, likely to be the teachers could end up being the teachers and vice versa.
Wow.
You could have
Very
two
true. I think
people and two people and one person says, look, I met this, man sitting out the front of the temple. He gave me all this advice, and then, so I gave him some money afterwards and it was fantastic. He really touched my heart. He looked deep into my eyes. And then our friend could say, are you kidding? I saw that man and he's just a beggar and what, and you don't know. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter so much. Yeah.
Sure.
You do have the experience you're, I think, meant to have.
Yeah.
And remember,
Yeah.
that's the teaching of yoga as well and Tantra. Like what is inside you is often how you then experience the world.
True. Talk to us. I mean, you've been here so many times. I'm sure you've had moments and experiences that shook you, or that has stayed with you for long as a teaching. Simple things. In general in India. Could you talk about some of these moments and experiences? That you have highest gratitude for. You've always been thankful for having that experience in India.
Yeah, there's been a little example on this last retreat in Varanasi. At the last moment, some people said they'd like to have their astrology reading. And so the hotel we're staying at organized for somebody to come and do that reading. And I was with people, but most of the people, they'd been to India maybe one time. So they didn't have, the strong interest in Devis such as I and a couple of the participants. And this astrologer came and he did the readings. They were okay. It was hard because the language barrier a little bit. But he said, "I'll come to my ashram tomorrow. It's near the Durga temple." And again, this is one of these things. Do we go? We don't know him. We've got a full itinerary. But I said, let's go. He's invited us, and we went. And in fact, he did a absolutely beautiful Kali puja for us.
Wow.
And we didn't have a Kali temple on our itinerary, but I felt it was very serendipitous that just ended up appearing. So I think that's actually important to stay a little bit spontaneous, because these things do just come. And I really believe, in synchronicity. I'll tell a funny story about this synchronicity, which I mentioned about Krishna kind of always sort of guiding my way. And because I play the flute. So my mother had given me many years ago a little bag that had a picture of Krishna playing the flute. I don't think she knew who that was. It was just a little bag. And so I used that all the way through India. And I would always, if I had to stay somewhere, I'd choose like Sri Krishna Lodge or something like that. Anyway, so on that first 6-month trip, I got to the airport and I'd overstayed my visa by 3 months. So this was back before they had e-visas, like a travel agent had organized my visa. And anyway, the big misunderstanding. And it was funny because my teacher had said, stay for 1 more month. I myself had woken up that day saying, I don't want to leave India. So you have to be careful what you wish for. I got to the airport and I said, well, can I just get on the plane? They said, no, like this is a serious mistake, offense. You need an exit clearance visa. You have to go back to Chennai. You're going to have to go and apply for that. Now, this would all be fine. I'd be very happy, but to stay longer. But suddenly it wasn't feeling so great because I was running out of money and I was and I said to the receptionist at the visa office, how long could this take? And he said, oh, the paperwork has to go to Delhi. It could take a month. Suddenly I was like, and this was, the funny thing of the mind, one moment you just want to stay, the next moment you want to leave, fickle the mind is. Anyway, I went back in a second day to see if I could get some hurry up with the paperwork. And I was not feeling so confident about this paperwork. It was like one of these offices was just like piles of paper everywhere.
Yeah.
And they said, go down the hall. You can ask that guy. And so I went into the office, and the whole time I was doing this mantra, like just not a mantra, but an affirmation, like home in 7 days, home in 7 days. And please, Lord Krishna, please, praying to Krishna. And he looked at my passport and he looked at me and said, okay, normally this would have to go to Delhi, but in your case, your special case, I will give you the clearance stamp.
Wow.
Great.
Oh.
So I'm walking out, and his assistant said to me, are you a Krishna devotee? Looking at my little bag. And I said, oh, yeah, I love Lord Krishna. And he said, so is he, pointing to the man who'd given me the stamp.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, I was on the plane and home, always remembering that.
Yeah. Talking about,
so often things don't go as planned, but it normally all works out.
Yeah. When you connect the dots, when you look back and connect the dots, it's making sense. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about your upcoming retreat and what is so special about, the retreat that's happening.
Yeah, as I said, that was the last time I was in Tamil Nadu, was this trip I'd been to Chennai and Pondicherry and Oroville, but had not traveled anywhere else. And as I've become more and more interested in Devi and in temples for the goddess, I started really over just the last couple of years feeling like, I really want to do this trip to Tamil Nadu and see some of those, to experience those temples there. And also that there are people that genuinely want to come and experience the culture and the spirituality of India without it necessarily being heavily focused on the yoga asana. So for this retreat, it's actually the first time that I'm really prioritizing the temple visits, and then the yoga will fit in around that rather than the other way around. Which is how, when I'm in India, that's how I do my travel. I do my yoga practice early in the morning and it's done. And then the rest of the day is living life and experiencing. And the thing is the yoga, in a sense, is woven into the day, because you just never know when you're going to maybe arrive at a particular temple and something will happen where you'll get the opportunity to sit for meditation or have that experience. So it's just part of the way the life is flowing, rather than feeling like, okay, we've got to, do our yoga practice at this time in this location. Like this trip will be much more about really immersing into the local environment and rich history and traditions. So one of the biggest challenges for the trip is actually just prioritizing where to go, because there's just so many things that we could be seeing and doing. So that's why I'm really happy to partner with Smukti and have your advice on the itinerary. I know I've said, some of the things that I personally like to see, and then you've also added and built out that itinerary with some places. Of course, being local guides, you know the area, and so then there's some fantastic additions. So I love it. It's a theme of some of the Shakta, being the Devi sacred sites, but also woven into that, and you can't really separate them. Actually, as some of the Panchabhuta stalams. Stalam being the word for sacred site. So, of course, the 5 elements is just such a big part of the teachings of yoga, In fact, I would say those Panchabhuta concept of the 5 elements is what blends yoga, tantra, and Ayurveda, because they all have that concept of the elements at that core. It's what actually bridges why we can understand that the mind and the body are not separate. They're part of this mind-body complex that Prakriti is moving through, and that the 5 elements, the slightly grosser or more subtle aspects of that manifest form. So to experience temples that are, honoring those elements, that's going to be very interesting.
Yeah. I'm really excited. Also, really excited to talk more in detail about our upcoming podcast, during our session that's coming up soon as well, on Monday. So, yeah. On that note, I think my last question is, it's been 20 years or 25 years since you started coming to India. What does India mean to you now?
There's so many ways that I like to engage with the country, like whether it's going to temples. But the other thing, Shaban, I haven't even talked about here is that I am obsessed with textiles. So all my Instagram, I don't really follow anything about any yoga teachers or whatever. I just follow like Indian textiles. So that's something I'm very interested in the history of textile making. And again, that's also why I'm really looking forward to coming to Tamil Nadu as well, to see the Kanchipuram saris. And so, on that level, and the nature. And one area I haven't even got into yet properly is I'd love to do I want to see a tiger. I've never seen a tiger. And I've also loved to go up to the northeast, to like Meghalaya, and see those rhinoceroses you have there. So bird watching, I mean, on so many levels. There's still many places I want to explore and many places I want to return to.
Yeah, lovely. It was really nice, talking to you today, knowing more about your India journey, and, even for me, a lot of new things that I learned from you, from whatever you have shared.
Sure. People can find me at my Instagram, Nea Ferrier Yoga, and I write about Ashtanga yoga at my Substack. So if you're into that yoga asana, and I also write about philosophy too, and I have a particular interest in women, and we haven't even got onto this topic, but this could be another time, is that I'm what's known as a menstruality mentor, which means one of the things I guide women in is to connect more deeply with their menstrual cycle, whether that's during the menstrual cycle years or moving into menopause and postmenopause as well. There's a huge body of work and obviously oral and written traditions in India on this as well. So that's another area of my interest in traveling to India, and particularly the South.
Yeah. Could you please, sorry to interrupt, could you please answer it for a woman who's listening to this, about this particular aspect that you mentioned right now about the menopause, and in detail?
Yeah, at the moment, often the menstrual cycle itself and going through menopause in West is viewed as a pathology, meaning it's like a medical problem or something that we need to fix. Where the lens from like a tantric perspective is that the movement of the menstrual cycle and the life stages women go through are all divine. It's all the movement of prana. And in a tantric perspective, prana is Shakti and Shakti is Devi and Devi is divine. So these are not parts of a woman that should be considered taboo or an inconvenience or a problem, but actually something that should be respected and honored and given space to. And honoring different life stages, whether it's the child rearing and fertile time, is equally valid, and the time of moving into non-menstruating years are just as valid as that fertile period. And in fact, from a yoga perspective, once a woman is no longer connecting as deeply with the inner moon, because, our menstrual cycle follows a lunar cycle, so I call it the inner moon. Why she can be a wise woman when that inner cycle stops is because then she really starts turning outwards, connecting with the outer moon. And that's where we get that real understanding of connecting with the cosmic energies in that wise woman time. So rather than it to be something to be sort of feared or not looked forward to, it's actually, a great sacred initiation into, the period of wisdom in a woman's life.
How much of it, I know a lot of women also have, mentally been affected, during this process and so on, and, mentally and physically being affected and, bogged down. Does this process also help in any way? Like, how do you deal with this? Like, is this a practice? What goes into this when you teach them, or what do you teach?
So there's a lot of crossover now between the yoga and then the sister science of Ayurveda. So Ayurveda gives a lot of instruction for women about how to nurture their body and mind during the different phases of of a woman's life stage. From a more philosophical outlook, just the very fact of paying something attention and giving it reverence causes a huge shift. So if you think about over the modern era where women have been, told to just continue on and keep being productive and, not take adequate rest, essentially ignoring the menstrual cycle. I think a lot of the pathologies have come as a result of this sort of viewing it as an inconvenience, where I have experienced, and I know other women also have, that the very process of paying attention, and not just paying attention, but actually giving reverence and honor to the process, can cause a huge shift and even an amelioration of physical and psychological symptoms.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. Yeah. On closing note, if you have anything, we can share and we can close after.
That's
We
fine.
have run over our
I
time. So,
think
yeah.
I've run out of time, and I can always keep talking and talking on this topic, so we better
Yeah.
wrap up now.
I'm learning a lot from you, and I really wish, we could do one more session later. I'm sure we are doing more sessions in the future, but yeah, thank you so much for joining today. Really means a
Thank you.
lot to have you here.
Thank you for the
Superb.
opportunity.